Alright, hello and welcome to Ashton's Nursery here. I'm going to be showing you how to germinate a white oak variety of acorns here. Let me bring you in a little bit closer to show you guys what I have. Now today I'm going to be dealing with a chestnut variety of oak, and that is in the white oak variety. I highly recommend you make sure that you are working with a white oak variety before you follow the instructions of this video. If it's a red oak or some other sort of oak, this might not work. Now the two things you're going to need is a glass of water here and some acorns. Now these are the two things you're going to need to determine if they're actually viable. Now you can see it is late November, so some of them are already sprouting here, which is really good. Now what we're going to do to determine whether they're good or not is we're going to stick them in the water and see if they float or not. Now I find that about half of them float. I've trained myself to be able to pick them up and feel how heavy they are and kind of determine if they will float, but I still get some floaters sometimes. As you can see, I'm dropping a few, but almost all of mine are sinking here as I've picked up the heaviest ones that I could find. And I find that about 90% of the ones that sink will actually germinate. Now the reason we do the float test here is to figure out if there's the larvae of a acorn weevil in here. Now that would look like a little maggot type bug. I've seen them before. I collected about 50 of these acorns earlier in the fall that I'm actually successfully germinating right now. I'm going to show you guys that a little bit later. But I did deal with some of those weevil larvae in there, and even though the acorns sink. But I only dealt with a handful out of my 50 acorns or so. Now I think that this has about a 90% success rate at figuring out whether there's a weevil larvae in there or not. And a lot of mine are sprouting, so it definitely works. If it floats, there's a really good chance that the acorn isn't going to grow. So it's really important to do this test, especially if you're only going to grow a couple. Now once we've determined that all of these have sank, I want to take a look in here actually, so let me just spill this water out real quick. Definitely cover that up. So all these acorns are good, all the ones that I picked up. Usually you don't have that good of success if you're just picking up a bunch of random ones, but again, I picked up the heavier ones. And by this time of year, a lot of the bad ones have already kind of been broken in half and such, so it's really good. So these ones have all not sprouted yet, they're kind of closed up, so those will most likely sprout, all 5, 6. I tried to pick ones that weren't cracking, 7. But as you can see, I was able to pick up, I don't know what that was, I was able to pick up a handful here that are already kind of cracked open. You can see that little root trying to come out. So those will be really easy. If you can manage to find some of those, that would be really good. You won't even have to go through the trouble of wondering if it will germinate or not, because they've already kind of started. So these would be really good, these right here. So we're definitely going to use those. Now this bucket is what I've been using to germinate my acorns here for the last month maybe. And you can see it's about 18 inches tall. There's my arm. I have pretty big arms, so there you go. It's about 18 inches tall, and then I have about 12 inches of dirt. Now acorns, they have a root that goes down pretty far down, and if you put it in a shallow container, that's not going to do them really good, and it'll be all over the place, and you'll most likely tear some roots that way. So we like to grow them in a way where they can grow straight down, and then we can transplant them into some sort of pot or something. Now I've just kind of put my favorite potting soil in here. This is a pretty basic potting mix I'm using right here, and then I put some mulch on the top. I mulched over the acorns, so I didn't bury the acorns in the dirt, I just put mulch over them. I'm gonna dig in here a little bit just so you can see my old acorns, and I'm gonna throw some of this handful in there as well. It's gonna add on. Now I have about 2 dozen or 3 dozen acorns I've put in here, and you can see there's one that's been growing in here my way, and you can see it is already cracked open, and this will most likely be sprouting in a few weeks. Now the interesting thing about these white oak acorns is they grow immediately in the winter time. That's really unique. Most seeds actually have to be stratified and then grown in the springtime. These sprout right away. That's the difference between these and a lot of other types of oaks. That's why this is really specific to white oaks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the sprouting ones first, because they're going to be my most highly valuable ones. Actually, there's an acorn right there. I'm just gonna bury this in with my thumb halfway. Okay, and I'm finding some empty spaces. There's a ton of them in here actually. Just some of them are buried more than others. I'm expecting to have a lot of trees popping up out of this. I've put so many acorns in this little container. It's okay, too many is a good thing sometimes. So again, burying them halfway in the dirt. And I found great success this way. I'm not saying this is the only way to do this. It's just the way that works for me, and I'm fairly certain it'll work for you as well. Found great success this way. And I'm gonna have different parts to this series here. I'm gonna definitely do follow-up videos on these just so you guys can see that this does work. So you can see I've buried all my acorns in there, and I'm gonna put the mulch back over, and I'm actually gonna put more mulch in here. This is a little bit icy. It's actually in the 30s today, upper 30s here in Virginia, so very cold Thanksgiving. And that should do really well. It should be sprouting in a few weeks, like I said. The roots are already starting, maybe a month or two. You know, you're already seeing some roots growing, so these are gonna do really, really, really well this way. And again, you can find them already sprouted in your yard if you have a oak tree, and that's gonna do you really well if you can find them where they're already cracked open and the roots are already starting to come out. Now another important thing is you can see that I have holes in the very bottoms of my bucket here. This has to be well drained, just like any pot, otherwise they will drown. I like to keep this fairly wet though in there. You can tell it hasn't rained in about 3 days and it's still fairly wet in there. So I keep it well watered, but you just have to make sure it drains really well. Otherwise, don't underestimate it. It will flood. I've made mistakes before and had the buckets have 1 or 2 inches of water above the dirt line, and that's no good. So you definitely don't want anything like that to happen. You don't want it to be mud, just wet dirt will do really well. And here's the tree that I've been working with here. It's been here as long as I've been here. I mean, it's such a big tree. It's probably been here so long, and you can tell by how big it is that they're just littered with acorns here in the backyard. And you can just find tons.